Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today to our webinar on theory of change in the context of our AfriConEU project. I'm Magda and I'm from Stimuli for Social Change, and we're going to go ahead and start with our first speaker, Konstantinos Vadratsikas. And Konstantine, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Konstantinos Vadratsikas, and this will be a short presentation focusing on measuring impact. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an initial overview of impact assessment so that you're familiar with the main components of measuring impact, and you have a better understanding of what is impact assessment, what is its importance, and how it's different from other types of evaluation. Also, we will examine how to determine what you need to measure, how to design a strategy for measuring it, including making decisions about the appropriate timing and the people you must engage. And finally, we will see why theory of change is an essential component that guides you when designing a plan for measuring your impact. But first, let's see what is impact assessment. As you can see on this slide, there have been various attempts to define impact assessments, four of which are included here. Definitions vary depending on the objectives of each impact assessment endeavor. For instance, the IAIA adopts a definition that allows room for reconsidering or even abandoning some aspects of the intervention, while the EU Commission definition is more focused on evaluating EU policy proposals. However, regardless of the selected definition, it can be said that impact assessment is about understanding the implications of an intervention, and this distinguishes it from other types of evaluation. Now let's take a look at the difference between monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment, as these terms are often wrongly used interchangeably. In fact, monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment are three different things, with distinct objectives, methods, and tools. Monitoring refers to tracking the implementation of a project or intervention, focusing on agreed targets such as the number of actions implementing, attendance rates, etc. And it should be understood as a management tool. On the other hand, evaluation examines whether an intervention has produced the expected outcomes and whether it is relevant, efficient, and effective. For instance, if you were running a training program for teachers, monitoring will examine whether the training sessions were delivered as they were described in the program design, whether the teachers' attendance reached the expected numbers, and whether the quality of the material adhered to center standards. On the other hand, evaluation would focus on measuring specific outcomes, such as the extent to which participants found the program relevant and satisfactory, whether the training was effective in terms of reaching predetermined learning objectives, and whether the format of the program was appropriate for the participants. An impact assessment plan goes one step further and explores what is the difference the program makes in various dimensions and stakeholders. In the training program example we described here, an impact assessment would have to account for the program's impact on the teacher's professional development, students' performance, school enrollment rates, and other wide implications of the program. So let's see why measuring impact is so important. Overall, we could say that impact assessment is a useful tool for both formative and summative purposes. On a formative level, impact assessment can help us understand whether there is an ongoing intervention and where it is leading to by examining some specific components. It can be used to explore which elements of an intervention work, which don't, so that involved stakeholders can make better informed decisions in order to keep the intervention on the right track. And on a summative level, impact assessment looks on the big picture, and it is used to assess the overall implication of an intervention that is completed, which is also important for informing stakeholders' decisions, but it's also crucial for reporting the project's funders and attracting new investors. So, having established what impact assessment is and why it is what it matters, let's find out how to design an impact assessment plan. The first thing you need to understand when designing an impact assessment plan is that it is a research project. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution for impact assessment, as each project has its own specific objectives, activities, deliverables, etc. Therefore, evaluating its impact requires an approach tailored to these specificities. So make sure to set your plan as a separate research project and treat it like this. So what you have to do is to carefully study the project's objectives and identify the criteria according to which the project's impact should be addressed. At this stage, you may need to turn to your stakeholders for feedback to ensure that your impact assessment plan addresses their needs and objectives. After identifying the evaluation criteria, the next step is to articulate evaluation questions to investigate if the criteria you have set are satisfied. Link the evaluation criteria to specific questions to make sure that all the potential impacts of your intervention are investigated. And the last thing that you need to do has to do with data collection. Considering that one of the purposes of impact assessment is to help stakeholders and investors make better informed decisions, any impact assessment plans relies on data collection. So evaluate the importance of all the data you collect during monitoring and evaluation, and design additional tools tailored to the evaluation criteria you have set to construct a concrete plan that explores all the questions your impact assessment must answer. Therefore, the most important decision you have to make has to do with what you need to measure in order to understand whether your intervention has an impact and what that impact is, and whether additional efforts are required to increase the impact of your project. OECD proposes a standard kit of evaluation criteria that can be applied in most interventions and can give you an overall assessment of your intervention. Depending on the nature and the objectives of your project, some additional criteria can be included, such as gender balance and human rights and other relative criteria. And as explained earlier, its criteria has to be explored through a series of questions, examining what has happened, how your intervention has caused the observed changes, and what is the overall success of the intervention. The questions that are selected to explore your evaluation criteria will then help you determine what kind of data you need and which strategy and method you should implement for collecting it. At this stage, it is important to think through who should be involved, why, and how they will be involved in each step of the evaluation process. The participation of stakeholders in the impact assessment process may be a crucial element for a successful design, as stakeholders may be a primary source of evaluation data, while in many occasions, stakeholders' involvement is required to refine the evaluation process and steer it towards the right direction. Therefore, you need to examine the role of the involved stakeholders and determine who is needed for which purpose and when is the best timing to involve them. Until you have a clear view of the combination of stakeholders and the necessary forms of involvement that serves best your impact assessment plan. It is also important to consider the timing of an impact evaluation. When conducted belatedly, the findings come too late to inform decisions, and when done too early, it will provide an inaccurate picture of the impact. For example, impacts will be understated when they have insufficient time to develop, or overstated when they decline over time. So consult with the project stakeholders to determine when the intervention's impact are expected to materialize, when they will need to have impact assessment findings in order to make relevant decisions, and make sure that you time your impact assessment activities accordingly. So summarizing on the relevance of impact assessment, if I want to have an impact assessment that is relevant to serve specific purposes, you should be able to use its findings and make better decisions. It should be linked to the purposes of your organization, and it should help you understand the impact of your projects. And in order to achieve this, there is something that you need to address first. Any idea what that is? How will you know what to expect? How do you know that your project will bring about specific outcomes? How do you understand whether your program was effective and efficient in achieving its purpose? This is something that in order to do that, you have to determine the causal attribution. And this is a requirement for calling an evaluation an impact assessment, as you need to be able to conclude that was what you did that made the difference. And in order to do that, you need to have a theory of what you want to achieve and how it is going to happen. This is where the theory of change comes into play. And Stav will explain us what all that we need to know about it. So I'm going to stop here and pass the floor to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Constantine. Before we move on to the next presentation, are there any questions for Konstantinos at this point? I've shared another Menti link with some questions about our next topic, theory of change. So I'm gonna share both slides this time because I realized before I didn't share all the answers. So the first question is, do you have a theory of change? Okay, most people say yes. No, they say no. Yeah, no is winning clearly. We're gonna get a feeling of how many people here are familiar with the theory of change before our expert staff goes into explaining. I'm gonna move to the next question also. If this moves or not. Were we ever asked by an investor or partner, business partner, to do some impact measuring? Great. So some people here have some experience. Because like we saw, this is another reason why we need to assess our impact, like Konstantinos explained. All right, thank you for participating. This is great. So our speakers can get a better sense of participants here today. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, please feel free to either share on the chat box or unmute yourselves to ask. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen again. Waiting. Okay, I will take the questions if there are in the meantime, but without further ado, I'm gonna ask Stav to go ahead with her presentation. Please, Stav.
Hello again, everyone. So now let's dive into the subject of our masterclass today, building a theory of change. And some words of introduction. A theory of change is as complex, as thorough, as deep, or as simple, as straightforward as you want and you needed it to be, depending on what your goal is. In this presentation, we will just kind of go through the foundations, the very basic foundation that makes a theory of change. And so we will make it as simple, as clear as possible. But I will say that it can get much more complex, especially if partners, funders, so on and so forth, are looking for it. But we're going to start with the basics. I will also say, sorry, another word is that following my presentation, Gideon from Space, also a member from the AfriConEU, will provide an example of how he, as a hub leader, is using the theory of change. So I'm going to do the theoretical part, even though I am going to kind of give an example, but he's going to give kind of much more hands-on example. And then we will also have an opportunity to practice the tool. We prepared a spreadsheet for you that you will also be able to take with the template of the theory of change. Lastly, I will say that if you have any questions, I'm not going to see the chat. You can also unmute yourself and interrupt me. It's okay. If anything is not clear, just or if I'm talking too fast, just let me know. So just a few words about myself and the relevance for this presentation. I'm a director at ATBN, the Africa Technology Business Network, one of the partner organizations with AfriConEU. I'm also a co-founder of a social innovation center here in Israel. I have 12 years experience working in social impact space. So I work with non-for-profit accelerators, impact investors, funders, ecosystem organization on their impact strategy. So a theory of change is definitely one of the tools that I'm using. I work in the space of innovation for development, social finance, so on and so forth. And I have a background in international development, which is also relevant to here. So what is a theory of change? Let's just define it so we're all kind of clear. It's a structure. It can be a diagram. It can be a table. Sometimes it's a narrative that explains how a program has an impact on its beneficiaries. So if previously Constantinos talked about how he measures or assesses the impact, this is how we plan. Okay, it's the theory of how we're making the change. So it's a theoretical tool. I like to call it a strategic tool. It connects basically for what we do and the impact we're going to have by breaking all the little bits and pieces. So what theory of change? Just ask to unmute yourself, please, if you're not asking questions or having a comment. Thank you. So a good theory of change outline all the things that the program or the intervention or the product does with or for its beneficiaries. It outlines the impact that it aims to have on them, and all the separate outcomes that lead or contribute to that impact. Maybe it sounds a bit kind of up in the air, but we're going to take it a step by step. This is an example of the theory of change in a kind of diagram structure. And you can also here in the left see all the different components of the theory of change: activities, outputs, outcomes, goals, and impact of scale. So this is one way that you might see a theory of change. But it's very kind of, I think, clearly shows, because of the different colors, it takes all the different components from the activities until the impact, and it breaks them down. And why do we do that with a theory of change? Because we want to understand, after we start assessing, what part of our program, service, intervention, product is most effective to the impact that we want to achieve. Okay, so let's take it. One more thing. A theory of change is very much known as the beginning of an assessment kind of process, but it actually could be used, and kind of my experience as a consultant in this realm is that it can actually be used for many different needs. So for planning activities, for evaluation, of course, for strategic reasons, as a work plan to make sure that we're all on the same kind of on the same page. For marketing reasons, now today when impact is considered to be something much more important for our businesses, to make sure that the team is on the same page as we outline exactly what our program is doing, to identify how you contribute to impact at scale. If you're dealing with big problems, I'm going to speak about, for example, gender equality in the innovation space. So you want to know what exactly your contribution to that problem at scale. So in theory of change can help you do that. And where to channel resources and where not to. If you are an impact-driven organization, there is no logic to kind of invest resources in activities that do not lead for impact. So a theory of change can help you identify those places. Okay, so step one, and I think we're going to be sharing more resources, videos, articles, and also this presentation, so you don't have to memorize. But still, we try to make it simple. So step one, identify your beneficiaries. Who is the group that you want to impact? People, communities, so on. So for our example, let's take female entrepreneurship. We know that the participation of women in innovation and technology and digital ecosystem is not as high as men, which is a problem. So let's say that you're a hub and you want to increase the participation of female entrepreneurs in your program. So that's your group, that's your beneficiaries. Impact female entrepreneurs in your city, for example. Step 2, you identify your impact, your big kind of, let's say your northern star, okay? The big impact you want to have. And my recommendation for that is to relate your activities to one of the SDGs. The SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, are kind of a blueprint for all kind of social, environmental, and economic challenges. And usually in kind of the impact realm, you can connect your activities to one of those 17 goals. So for example, if you work on gender equality, it's SDGs number 5. And if you would kind of Google SDG number 5, you will see that under that there's different missions that you can relate. One of them is actually to contribute to gender equality in the innovation space. So that's kind of the environment, the big impact that you want to contribute to. Step 3. You identify your inputs. What are inputs? All the resources that you need to implement your activities. Okay, so you might be taking that for granted, but basically all of us running programs, we have funding, we have staff, we have infrastructure, so we have equipment. So you need to know exactly how much money is going into this program, how many hours of staff, what is the different equipment you need, which kind of infrastructure. So that's all the things that you in your organization puts into your program. Next, what the program and its staff do with these resources. So you take the money, you take the infrastructure, you take the men and women hour working on it, and you do stuff. So you develop training material for female entrepreneur, you recruit those female entrepreneur, you operate an accelerator, for example, you construct presentation. So all the things that you do for those beneficiaries with the resources you have. That's the next step of your theory of change. Step 5, and this is where it starts to be, oh, I see that there is a slide missing here. I'm sorry, we'll fix it before we will send it to you. I'm sorry. I apologize because there's another step, a very important, here, no, sorry. There's a very important step between the activities and the short-term outcome, and that's your outputs. The outputs is everything that you create that is tangible. So for example, for your activities, you develop a training material. So for example, in this webinar, we will have this webinar, this masterclass online. The AfriConEU, I think, created 60 of these kind of online tutorials. So that's an output. An output is everything that you created and is tangible. Now, a lot of organizations kind of measure their outputs because it's very easy to measure. We recruited 10 female entrepreneurs. We created 2 worksheets. We produced 10 online trainings, so on and so forth. But it doesn't indicate if those things that you created, those output, actually made any change. If you want to know if it made any change, that already leads us to an outcome or a kind of an outcome world. So I hope, maybe I'll explain it again, the difference between an outcome and an output. Output is tangible. It's very easy to count as things that you create. An outcome, which is the next step, is actually things that made a change because of your activities and output. So let me go to the next step, which is the outcome. Change that occur in other people or conditions because of the activities and the inputs. So what we're looking here is the change. So for example, if you did a training program, you want to see that there is an increase in knowledge. There is more knowledge. People know more. They have more skills, more tools because of what you did. Or a female entrepreneur, for example, found a job. Or there was a growth in investment into a startup, or there was an increase in motivation. So as you can see here, it becomes very clear the difference between an output, which is something that you created kind of in a very straightforward way, and what was the outcome of it is changes. In a theory of change, we usually differentiate between short-term goals or outcome and long-term. So short-term is anything that happened because of your program in the next 1 to 3 years. So if a female entrepreneur did a program with you, you can expect that The increase in knowledge would be immediate. If your program was around investment, you want to make sure that it raises investment relative shortly after the program. The same with finding a job. So the first kind of change with the first kind of stage in the outcomes is the short term. But we also want to know what their long-term change is occurring. So it's the same thing. It's the changes that occur in other people or condition because of activities and output, but in the long term, 3 or more years. And here we already look at the impact that your activities have in kind of in the broader kind of sense. So here, if you are running program for female, let's say for 5 years, you want in the end to see in your city, in your country, a growth in the number of startups led by women. So an impact in wider scale. And obviously this will take longer term. It's not it's not something that you can measure in a year. You want to see decrease in wage gaps between men and women. You want to see an increase in female entrepreneur in the region. These are all long-term outcomes that kind of take longer to kind of flourish, but also to measure. So I hope, I mean, it sounds complex, but I hope we were able to make it as simple as possible. I'll just summarize here. We take the inputs, everything that we put in our program, money, people, resources, so on and so forth. We use those inputs to do activities for or with our beneficiaries. We create outputs, tangible things from our activities, and then we try to identify what are the short-term outcomes and the long-term outcomes we want those activities and outputs to have, and we want to contribute to an impact and scale, usually relating them to one of the SDGs. This is the tool that we made for you. It kind of goes with each one of the categories I just mentioned, the inputs, the activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. We define each of them. We will be sharing this with you so you can take it back and kind of work with your team on it. And we will also be practicing it right now. So I hope I didn't speak too fast and it was relatively clear. And I would love to get any question, either if you want to unmute yourself or in the chat. And also, as I said, we'll have the opportunity to listen to Gideon kind of taking this theory and putting it into practice.
Staff, there's a question. Oh, I see a hand raised, and then there's a question in the chat. Please unmute yourselves. Kiko, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. That's a very great presentation, by the way, so thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah, so my question basically is with respect to should the beneficiaries, because when you're mentioning about identifying the beneficiary, you mentioned people or groups of individuals and such things. So my question is like, is it always has to be around people? Maybe, for instance, if my activity is more in the environment, should I still be, will I still be required to identify the beneficiary in terms of people? Or maybe I want to make an impact, maybe a speech that is going distinctive. So should it also be about people? I hope my question is clear.
Oh, very clear. I think it's a great point and an opportunity for me to clarify. You're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be on people. So, for example, if you're working on an impact challenge in the climate change, which I think is SDG maybe 11, a theory of change can definitely be relevant for that. So your beneficiary would be either the wider environment, or if you're working on a specific, let's say, forest or a specific lake or a specific, so you would define your beneficiary in a geographical region, and then the outcomes that you wish to see, for example, can be related to those environmental outcomes. So impact. So it can be, for example, a decrease in CO2 pollution, right, or an increase in clean water. So to answer your question in a straightforward way, it doesn't have to be only people or a group. It can definitely also be an environment, for example.
I saw a question on the chat. Dale, should I read it out loud, or do you want to unmute yourself and please ask?
I can do that. Okay, good morning. Thanks for your presentation. My question goes to if we can use this theory of change on the product itself for service development. So as a starting point, and defining the lifetime on a lifetime approach of the product, you know. So you designing the product or service, applying this theory, and then planning for the outputs, right? Or only on organizations?
No, so I think that's, again, it's right to the point. You can definitely do it also at product and service. I'm actually working with a startup right now to develop their theory of change, and especially if you're a startup and you're not really sure what the impact of your product will be, this can actually help you plan. So it can definitely be, you take the same component, but instead of a program or organization, you do it via the eyes of the product and service. And I think there's also something that you mentioned that is very important to clarify. A theory of change is it's dynamic. Okay, it's dynamic given the circumstances. Circumstances can change. For example, inputs can change. It's dynamic because if you change your activities, and so you'll have to change your theory of change. And also, if you're in the startup world and you have a product or a service, that might also change because of users, because of technology limitation. So the theory of change can change as much as your product, service, organization, or program does. So you can definitely, but you can definitely use it on a product or service. I hope that.
Yes, thank you. That's the case. Thank you.
I think Dale, do you want to read the question in the chat?
There was an old question by Dale. I think it was.
Yes,
hello.
I think I can. Yes, I'm Dale. I typed this before this this lady presentation. When the other presenter was talking about impact assessment. I think at the end he insinuated that we need to establish the causality between the input, output, outcome, and then eventually the causality to the impact. And then I wanted to ask how, if the design of the product or for the project will have to take into consideration the fact that other factors might also affect that impact or that change, and how will you do that?
Okay, so that's the $1 million question. Maybe I can start answering, and then my colleagues can pitch in. So the question of causality is the question with impact assessment and also theory of change. And I think I was relating it to this a bit in the beginning when I said that the theory of change can be as simple as complicated as you wanted and you needed to be. Let's put it on the table. It's almost impossible to show causality, right? So it's very, very, very difficult. I think what a theory of change can help you do, because you break out the pieces, is to kind of understand what is your contribution. It's not causality, but what's your contribution from your activity to the impact and scale that you want to show. Now, if you relate activities to outputs to outcomes, you do need to imagine that line of causality. You need to aspire for causality. If you're able to always prove it, that is much more difficult, and that also shows, depending on the resources. So what my recommendation usually with organizations that I work with is that aspire to that the activities outputs and outcomes will be as closely aligned, okay, from a logical, theoretical perspective as possible, and that will increase the possibility that there is a causal link between your activities and the outcomes. Konstantin, do you want to add anything to that point?
I think that you covered me what you said, but the main idea is that you should be able to know on a theoretical level what you're going to do and how this will lead to what you're expecting to do. So you need to have a theory that if I want to achieve this, I'm going to need to do these activities. Of course, if you have the more information you have, will allow you to consider and to account for as many factors that might interfere in this process. But in order to know what you need to measure to do your impact assessment, because that was my point, you need to have established before how your intervention is going to lead to this specific impact. You need to have established a theoretical model that will explain how your intervention leads to specific results. And of course, it is not proving causal relations, it's just establishing a theoretical model, because causality, as Stav said, cannot be proven outside the lab, I think.
But I just had another thought following what you said that I want to share, is that for us working in the social impact space, it's becoming clearer and clearer that one organization, program, product or service is able to make impact and scale, right? It's a combination of a lot of many factors. So if causality is something that you're interested in, what I would recommend to do is to try and map other organizations, products, services, programs that are in your kind of realms of expertise, and to see what's your contribution and what's their contribution, if it's complementary. So what is your unique kind of unique contribution in relation to what other organizations in that space are doing? So for example, if going back to my example, if in your city there is 10 training programs for female entrepreneurs, and after 5 years we see an increase in female entrepreneurs, of course we cannot relate it to your activities. You contributed to it, but there's no causal link. However, if for those 10 programs only one is focusing on, for example, climate change, okay, so that's your specific added value. So I think that's another way to look at it, is to look at partners and then complementary kind of skills and impact.
I see a hand raised. Kiko, do you have a follow-up question, or is that from earlier? And there is another question in the chat by Ambrose. Would you like to unmute yourself and share your question, please, or should I read it? Okay.
Well, I think you can go ahead and read it. Thank you.
Okay. So Ambrose is asking, where is the theory of change more impactful? Is it on project or strategy evaluation?
It's almost a philosophical question. I mean, if as a strategy consultant, I would say strategy, but maybe evaluation experts would say evaluation. I'll tell you what, my answer.
Definitely evaluation.
So you see, okay, let's fight. So maybe it's good to hear a few perspectives. My perspective would be is, if you don't know what impact you want to achieve, how can you assess it? And a theory of change help you clarify what impact you want to achieve. So for me, and I think, you know, that's, if we can take the theory of change out, it's kind of a strategy evaluation kind of balance. My perspective is that in this entire process of strategy and evaluation, impact is about learning. It's about improving, right? We don't have a lot of time, a lot of resources. We want to make sure that what we do is the most impactful. I think a theory of change is a beginning of a learning process, and the evaluation is what makes us learn better and being able to see what we are able to improve. But the starting point is to be clear on what you want to achieve. My personal perspective.
I would say that it's rather the theory of change is rather a tool that binds the two things together, strategy and impact assessment. Without the theory of change, you could have both the strategy and both try to assess your impact, but it would be it will look like two fragmented processes. There will be no connection between them. With the theory of change, it's like a glue that binds these two things together. That will be my way of seeing things.
The next step with this theory of change, which we didn't go into, is that each outcomes, we need to match each outcome with an indicator. And the indicator is what helps us evaluate. That is kind of the bridge between, but that we might cover in a different AfriConEU webinar.
Are there any more questions? Before we move to the more practical part of this masterclass, so this is my last Mentimeter, as I promise. Okay, I'm gonna share it to you because we want to see, before we dig into the next part, we want to see how you have assessed your impact. This might take a few more minutes to fill in. Okay, I see some answers coming in using SDG metrics, mostly during sustainability reports. Great. I will give it a few more minutes for anyone else who would like to contribute. And the second question is, how many people do you think your hub or your organization, or you can put anything in the place of hub, really has impacted? Go back. Okay. Okay, we're getting some answers. Very nice. Match outcomes with indicators. Follow up with M&E to measure deviations. And then by how many? Great, thank you very much for participating. If any of our speakers has any comments to make on the answers we see, please feel free to do so. How have you assessed your impact? Yes, but did not know how. Well, you're at the right place to learn how to do that. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to move to the next slide to see if people have answered that too. Okay, no answers in the second question. Because this takes a little longer, I will give a couple of more minutes. Is that okay? 2 more minutes? So people have answered, we usually use elaborate plans with contributions from stakeholders. Outcomes, mostly output. If you wish, please go ahead and answer the next question too. How many people you have impacted as your hub or enterprise? Oh, wow. All right. Thank you very much for pinching into these questions. This is just for to get an idea where people stand at. And I'm gonna pass the floor to Gideon for his presentation of theory of change in practice. Hello, Gideon.
Hi. Good morning once more, everyone. So now the experts have spoken and I have to demonstrate what they have said. Difficult one, but I'm going to try. So I'll share my screen and then use one of the projects that we handled last year to explain what we did by way of theory of change and the impact that we sought to achieve. So, you know, the fact that when you are undertaking any research, you come up with assumptions, right? That guides whatever you do during the research process. So also in the theory of change, a number of assumptions are made. In this case that I'm going to refer to, we had a project called the Smart Woman Project. And the problem that we identified that made us come up with that project was the fact that a number of women in the rural areas were left behind in terms of the digital transformation process in Ghana. And for some of these women, aged between 18 to 35, they were also more or less not willing to be part of the digital transformation processes because of the influx of internet fraud that they were hearing. So like anything that needs to do with digital, they were out of it. And for most of them, they were also not aware of how relevant these digital tools were to their personal life. So this is the problem that we set off to address. Now, using the theory of change, we usually want to draw a diagram that will be on the minds of every key person involved in the project to do that. And like staff said earlier, the focus should be on the outcomes, but with the theory of change, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. With the theory of change, you need to work from the reverse. So we know where we are getting to, but how do we get there? So our whole objective was to create a digitally aware woman that are capable to use digital tools to promote their businesses and then also enhance their daily lives. So now looking at the how, we felt that one, like we identified from the problem, most people were not enthused about digital adoption because of mistrust, like they were afraid of what could happen, people defrauding them when they are online and all the associated problems that could come. So we need to build trust. And then also they need to know how their use of these digital tools can help them. to improve on their business. So also we establish relevance. The target group, like I said, was 18 to 35. And we needed to come up with strategies that will help us to be able to help these women to become digitally aware and be able to use the digital tools. So one was to design a digital training module, and then also come up with activities that will help them simulate whatever the situations on the ground could be when they use these digital platforms and tools. And then also we had a mentoring and coaching program in place for them that will help them. In the end, we wanted to create inclusiveness, and then also like a sense of ownership for the digital adoption that they were going to be involved in. So this is what we had by way of the graphics, helping each of us to know exactly what we wanted to achieve. So anytime that we are planning or developing a project, it is good to come up with a theory of change like this. Now, in terms of why it is beneficial to do this, in situations where we just went ahead with a project without coming up with a theory of change, impact assessment was difficult, right? Because we were not clear in the minds of all those involved in the implementation as to how we wanted to achieve our outcomes. And so I remember there was a project we had, and at the end, we had an M&E person come around, and when he asked the different staff that were involved in the project as to what we wanted to achieve and how we intended to do it, everybody gave a slightly different opinion. Why? Because we did not come up with this theory of change that would spell out specifically what we wanted to achieve and how we intended to achieve it, and the overall impact that we wanted to create. So if you look at this diagram, you realize that the impacts that we wanted to achieve were very clear. That the rural women will be able to interact with others digitally. So if they will be able to interact with others, then one of the things that we set off to do was to help them identify all the securities around social media tools like WhatsApp, to be able to create their Instagram accounts, Facebook accounts, and see how they can manage it. And then we also were looking at how they can use that to scale their businesses in terms of improving on their sales. And we're looking at a 50% increment. And so how were they going to use that, the digital tool? So for instance, they will not just have a WhatsApp account, but how can they use things like their status to promote their businesses? So we taught them how to take very good photographs of their products and be able to post them on their status and be able to follow through and hold conversations on that. And then also visibility. So we looked at how they can brand their social media handles. So all these things were done. And it was easier for everybody involved in this project to be able to follow through because we had the theory of change clearly spelled out. Now, a number of ways that we can do this, and one of them is the tool that staff shared at the end of her presentation. So I tried to put what we did also into that. Let me show that. Because we are going to go into breakout sessions and see how each of a selected number of you can use that to do that theory of change. So we had our inputs that was going to help us to achieve that. So the digital training, the simulation activities, mentoring, and the coaching, and then the various activities, development of the training materials, the way we're going to recruit the women, the workshop visit, how we're going to do that. In terms of output, we had improved market opportunities, improved usage of smartphones, and then confident usage of digital tools and platforms. We were focusing on SDG 5 and SDG 8. And so helping bridge the gap in gender equality, and then also promoting decent work and economic growth. So this was the theory of change that we used. And like the two experts said, Konstantinos and staff said earlier, it's just a theory, right? So at the end of the project, when you do your assessment, there's always some deviations, but at least that helps you to be able to follow through a certain trajectory that was set at the beginning, and helps to control activities that are done, so that when you are measuring impact, it is very easy for you to do. So that's the experience I have had, and just one example that we have shared. So I think that Magda is going to lead us and put us into breakout rooms, and then we can use some examples also from you, unless anyone has a question to ask.
I have already shared the tool that Gideon just explained in the chat box, so you can all find it there. Thank you, Gideon. I'm going to wait a few more minutes if there are any questions for Gideon while we're all together. So I will break you into 3 rooms. So Konstantinos, Stav, and Gideon are going to take 1 room each. I think it makes more sense. Okay. Give me 1 more minute. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can ask. And then we're gonna give you 10 to 15 minutes, right, Gideon? For people to work on the tool.
Yes.
And then we're gonna come back here for any final questions or discussion points. Sorry, 1 second. I put okay, I'm just gonna put 2 rooms. I think it makes more sense. And then
There's a hand up.
yes, please.
That too.
Thank you so much. I just put to ask while you're still organizing. Thank you for all the presentations. This is more based on the experience that you have in terms of social impact. Would it be advisable to, when we look at projects that we can see already implemented, to look at it from a horizontal type of approach, where, you know, the more of those projects you create, the further the reach, and possibly the quicker the impact, or to, in terms of priority, to then look at it and see where the gaps are. Instead of actually duplicating, you then look at what are the next points that we can actually, more like look at it from top down instead of horizontal. What would you advise in terms of approach when it comes to social impact and coming up with projects that we know would make a difference in the communities? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I will start and then Stav and Constantinos can add. I think sometime 2016, 2017, that was the approach we're using, right? We were just building on projects one after the other, thinking that we will learn as we go and be able to create impact with that multi-tiered approach to designing and implementing projects. But at the end of the day, you realize that you are likely to waste a lot of resources, and in most cases, even waste the time of most participants because there is no clear objective. I also realized that if you are carrying out a project that involves training, the trainers are also sort of confused as to what the direction should be because they don't have a clear guide as to what the focus of their training should be. So it is always best to sit down and say, okay, this is a problem and we want to solve it. These are the outcomes or impacts we want to achieve. And then you can now come to how can we achieve that? Walk through those steps. And then you can start working from the bottom to the top.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome. I don't know if Stav or Konstantinos has something more to add.
If there are no questions, I can move you now to breakout rooms. Please use the tool from the chat box. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms. Let's say 10 to 15 minutes, or if you finish earlier, you can come back. Is it okay, to the main room? All right. Okay.
Hey.
I don't know why you're not assigned to me. Sorry. Are you able to join?
Hey, Magda.
Hello.
We had a nice discussion with the example that Kiko brought and felt that it was the time to come back.
Okay, nice. Let me. There is 10 more minutes approximately. No, yeah, or yeah, 5 more minutes. Sorry, 8. I will message the other room.
So since you're waiting, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to ask a question with regard with the quantification of the impact that can be attributed to a program. So for instance, if we are measuring impact, and as you said, impact can be complex, like we cannot say like we created this impact, like there is no direct causal relationship. So is there any way to quantify our contribution to the impact?
Again, this would really depend on the resources that you have to do quantitative assessment. It would really, it would be resource dependent. Do you know the IMP model? Did you hear about the IMP model?
IMP?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
It's called the Impact Management Project, and they have like a template. They don't call it, they call it attribution, not contribution, but that may be a tool to kind of to help. Again, causality is an issue with impact assessment. If, by the way, you're partnering with a university, academic research is the place where you try to prove causality. So I don't know, you might be able to kind of get in touch with their economics, public policy, statistics department, and then maybe they can do an in-depth research. But again, like we recommended before, you need to kind of clarify, state what you're trying to have a contribution to. You can try and kind of gather evidence using qualitative methods. It depends, and then it will depend on the resources you have if you want to go into quantitative in-depth measurement.
Thank you very much.
Can I add something? Little? Maybe a very short or simple question to staff. Yeah, so earlier when you were talking about the beneficiaries, talking about how it could be people, for instance, or if it's something that has to do with the environment or maybe climate change or something, then it's with the environment. And I was just thinking that maybe there could be like direct and indirect beneficiaries, sort of. So for instance, if I'm doing a project on climate change, that of course benefits the environment, yes, but that also benefits the people in the environment. So maybe there could be some direct beneficiaries and indirect beneficiaries. I was just thinking about it. I don't know how possible it sounds to the ears of the experts. So I just wanted to, ask. Staff, you are muted.
I think that's a really good point, and actually it goes back a bit to something I just said to Kiko earlier. What I would say is that in a theory of change, ideally, you want to relate to your direct beneficiaries, because as we actually now discussed, it's hard as it is to prove contribution. So to prove indirect contribution is even harder. So basically, you want to be able to tie as closely as you possible the direct beneficiaries with your activities. However, I would say two things about that. One thing that I said to Kiki earlier is that sometimes you will have two different theories of change. For example, if you are, for example, he gave the example, you're doing training, you're helping entrepreneurs develop startups in the field of climate change. So then, as you say, you'll have two beneficiaries. One is your entrepreneurs, and the other is the outcomes that you want to see coming out of these startups. So my recommendation would be actually to separate, to build two different theories of change. So that's one thing. The other thing is that where the indirect impact goes, I would put in the impact. In the kind of big, the thing that you can't really control is not an outcome that you inspire, but it's the big impact. So if, for example, you work on gender and climate, then in your theory of change, you put SDG 5 and SDG, again, I think 11, but I'm not sure, because it's kind of part of what you do, but you're not committed to achieve any specific outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it makes a lot of sense. Seeing how difficult it is already to measure impact, bringing in a lot of other variables will make it a tedious, something else. So it makes a lot of sense. Go directly, and then probably just put the indirect ones maybe in the I don't know, in the bigger picture. Not,
as you said, it's actually so complicated. So maybe one of the things that we should have put on the presentation is keep it simple.
Exactly.
Okay. There's some criticism today in kind of the impact space that funders are looking for impact reports and theories of change and so on and so forth, but it actually takes so much time for doing the actual work. So we need to balance, right? We don't want to spend all of our time only strategizing and evaluating. We actually want to do the work that creates an impact. So I think it's a balance there, and I think keeping it simple is a good way to go.
Exactly, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I've now closed all the breakout rooms.
Yes, Magda, you cut us short.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Welcome back. Well, we said up to 15 minutes, but please feel free. We have 15 minutes left before the end of our masterclass. So if you guys want to share or continue the conversation, you're more than welcome. Please, you have the floor, Gideon.
Yeah, I think probably, definitely, I can share the screen, and then you can talk about a bit about your project, and maybe others can also give feedback.
Yes, please. I'll really appreciate that.
Okay.
I just sent you.
All right, so you can go on.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my project is creating, advancing technology and innovation in the rural areas of Nigeria. Basically, apart from the state capitals, for example, like Akure, that you're familiar with, like Lagos, like Abuja, when it comes to the nooks and crannies, the local areas, the rural areas, the level of adoption of innovation and technology there is very low. And we have great minds there, but it's just that they don't have the resources, they don't have the infrastructure to be able to explore the benefits of technology. The few of them who are familiar with it, they use it for crime, cyber crime, and other things. So my plan is to put the youths together in the rural areas and train them on the use of emerging technologies to become market-fit individuals and entrepreneurs. And that's the plan. And during the breakout section, we looked into the inputs, which includes the finances, the training space, the digital tools, that's the laptop, the software, the internet connectivity, and the skilled personnel. So we're going into the activities while the data section. And like I said, I'll appreciate everybody's support towards so that we can be able to understand the theory of change better and be able to put it into our program. Thank you.
Yeah. So definitely I've sent my email address to you. We can continue the conversation, and I'm sure that the other facilitators, our experts here, might also want to throw in some help when needed in that regard.
If there is any other participant who would like to share something or ask any further questions, that would be great too. We still have a few more minutes to go, so we would love to hear from you. In the meantime, I would like to remind everyone to please fill in our evaluation forms. I have been sharing the link. We're really going to hear your opinion. Please make sure you put your email down so we can email you your certificate of attendance, and you enter a raffle for a small surprise by AfriConEU. So I just shared the form again in the chat box. So before you leave this masterclass, and I think we have a hand raised by Tato, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Would you like to unmute yourself? Yes.
Thank you so much. It's actually a follow-up from what Sir Gideon advised. So just to say that, okay, I'm looking at it from a country perspective. I'm in a forum, and as well from a business perspective. So I just wanted to know in terms of approach, because we've identified a problem, right? And if another organization is already doing it, my question is it more impactful to still continue, right? In terms of reach, or to actually then leave it to that specific organization because they are looking at it and are in the right track, and then go deeper into the other areas, just so when we are leading other leaders, we can then steer them in the most appropriate way in terms of priority, you know, and allocating resources. So if I could just understand from your experience with that perspective, with what would the approach be? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had a problem with my computer, and I couldn't hear. So maybe if one of my colleagues want to take that, I think it's okay now for the next question. But
Yeah, Tatu, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that if when we start on a wrong foot, it's always good to remedy the situation when we realize that there's something that could be done better. So if even you did not design a theory of change and you are in the middle or at some point in the implementation, you can still use the theory of change tool to organize your activities and be able to clearly define what actions you want to take to achieve the outcomes that you expect to achieve, and do that with your team. so that everybody is in sync. So probably you had some outcomes that you wanted to achieve, or probably also a reason why you started the project. Maybe you identified the problem. And so if even the outcomes are not very clear, you can still go back to the drawing board, as they say it, and clearly state some outcomes that you want to achieve with the project. And you can co-design some action plans that can help you to achieve that using the theory of change tool. And then now follow it from this time onwards until the end of the project. It makes it easier when you want to conduct your impact assessment.
Okay. So in other words, we start with the theory of change, and then it can guide us whether we should continue with the plan or divert into a different approach. So essentially, it should guide us to understand those points of approach.
Yeah, yes, even there are times that when you reconsider, if you sit back and ask yourself what at all you want to achieve with the project, you might be forced by the conditions, the prevailing conditions, to adjust the project's focus a bit, because maybe the path that you have already taken is not yielding results. Or it might mean doing more of something that you are doing less now. And so it helps to actually define things that you need to do to make your project successful.
Okay, noted. Noted, thank you.
You're welcome. I think Bruno has his hand up.
Is there another question?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So my question goes in the design thinking process using the theory of change. So for what I understood, this is an agile document, right? It's only informative when you publish it to the stakeholders. So in the process, you can always be reshaping it, right? It's not a statement, something like that. It's something that you move on. You can put it on a graphic later to show to stakeholders, but mainly it's a tool that you work on as the project goes. Is that it?
It's not set in stone, but it's a good tool that guides you through the process. If you feel that at some point you need to change something, you can always do this, but it should be. My advice would be that it should be linked to the goal that you have. You should always link it to your objectives.
Okay, much clearer. Thank you. It's because for what I think, Konstantinos, and if you don't mind taking your approach, this is great. The assessment and the theory of change for disruptive tools, right? Because if you have a problem that is a big problem and it's continuously changing because of technology or any other, it's very important for you to assess where the impact is coming from and not to lose yourself on what you're doing. Is that it?
If you identify that there is a process that is changing constantly, and this is one of your risk factors, and this should be also included in your design. So in that case, you can have a theory of change that takes into consideration that this process is a changing process, and then you design your activities accordingly. And also you can use impact assessment tools that would go through. You could use an iterative process that you would evaluate and assess how the process is proceeding, and then This will guide you through the and to your goal. And in the end, you will be able to change things on time before your project goes off track. These are tools that can be flexible in that way.
Thank you so much.
All right, this has been great, a very, very interactive masterclass. Thank you very much to all speakers and all participants. I'm going to ask you two things. If you feel comfortable to turn on your cameras, so our dissemination manager, our African dissemination manager can take a family picture, that would be great. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. I have shared the evaluation form on the chat multiple times. Please make sure you fill it in. We want to hear from you. Please make sure you include your email address so we can email you the certificate of attendance and you can enter an AfriConEU raffle. And you're going to hear from us, and we're going to send up a follow-up email to all participants with some articles, suggested readings, and the tool that you used today to practice theory of chains. Georgiana, I'm waiting for you to let us know when you're ready to take the picture.
Yes, thank you so much, Magda. It was a great masterclass, actually. So please, everyone smile. We're ready. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to wait online a couple of more minutes if people want anything else. And if you want to fill in the form now while we're still here, that will be great. If you want to exit, that's also okay. Thank you very much again for being with us today. Please follow us on social media. Please follow AfriConEU. We have many upcoming events, many masterclasses and webinars. Georgiana, do you want to remind us that our social media, please?
Yes, I will send them again in the chat in order to click and follow us ASAP. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the game.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.